It's my pleasure to offer a few remarks to the class before you venture out on your journey and before we conclude our ceremony. And I was thinking about how I've always found it uniquely exhilarating to hear multiple languages as I walk down the street. Indeed, it's remarkable to me how many different tongues one can witness or overhear in a very short span. Someone speaking to their mother on the phone, a pair of students who met at a cultural event or an affinity group meeting, sharing the same language. I often wonder where they might be from, or how many other languages they speak, or what kind of gossip they might be spilling. As often as not, the content of these conversations is completely unknown to me. And although I'm not necessarily advocating eavesdropping on other people's conversations in any language, sometimes I might recognize a word or two and gain some self-satisfaction. In a way, I'm encountering the globe on a daily basis. I wish I understood the vocabulary, what's behind the inflection, and what's possible to learn about the speaker's backgrounds and identities, as if in that brief moment of involuntary eavesdropping, I can gain vicarious entry into any variety of cultures. But really, I'm mostly just thankful to be in an institution like this one, and in a city like Boston, where 1 in every 4 residents is foreign-born, and such expression and encounters occur all the time. I know all of you in the class of 2025 can relate. Pardee is a global school. BU is an international university. And we have brought the world to Boston. Think about it. Including the GDP Center, up to African Studies, the Pardee School spans from 53 Bay State to 232 Bay State. That's 4 blocks, sometimes very long blocks, especially if you're trying to get from the dorms up to class and CAS and Psi Auditorium. But on any given day, you can traverse that same span, and by the time you've reached the end, you might have heard half a dozen or more languages. Urdu or Hindi, Spanish, Hebrew, Amharic, Mandarin, English. Some familiar to you, others completely alien. Although you might not hear the same euphonious tones in these overheard conversations, I suspect that many of you, like me, have never found these brief encounters on the sidewalk intimidating, let alone offensive. Never have I wanted to silence those voices. In fact, I want to amplify them. I want to hear more. And yet, to some audiences, the linguistic diversity of these very same sounds is cacophonous and symbolizes something very different. The definition of cacophony literally is bad sound, or a mix of sounds that are not pleasing to the ear. Now, to the few of you international relations graduates who somehow found time to dabble in poetry or literary studies, I am not referring to cacophony, shout out for that. I'm not referring to cacophony in the literary sense, but its conventional understanding, in which the word itself and the sound it describes are often associated with unpleasantness, chaos, disharmony. For some, these otherwise incomprehensible bad sounds of the city will simply lead them to decamp to some remote area, free from the oral assault of multilingualism. After all, homogeneity is simple, straightforward, easy to comprehend. Diversity is noisy. For others, however, the encounter may take a darker turn. What they hear is not only cacophonous, but so offensive that it impels them to go further. That is, to stifle what they regard as cacophony by silencing it or removing it altogether. They will say, we don't want these discordant voices, the bad sounds, nor the foreign alien bodies that produce them. To be fair, this is not a recent phenomenon. In fact, in this country, public efforts to restrict language use go back at least as early as Teddy Roosevelt who said in endorsing the English-only movement in 1907 that he did not wish to dwell in, quote, a polyglot boarding house. And hostility towards immigrants is not geographically specific. Indeed, we've seen it from Berlin to Durban to Bristol and beyond. We silence voices through language decrees disguised as unifying and principled policy, through canceled visas, shutting out the noise, at least in our public lives and the affairs of the nation, reduces cacophony. Well, at the Pardee School, we regard Teddy Roosevelt's polyglot boarding house not as something to disparage, but as something to celebrate, something in which we live. In fact, we not only occupy a polyglot boarding house, we signed a long-term lease. And we're throwing a block party. These voices, your voices, whether you're a heritage speaker or a new learner, a native speaker or a first gen, they represent transnationalism, cosmopolitanism, and a genuine global engagement. They also bear witness to the unparalleled success of American higher education in bringing international students, with a record 1.1 million of whom studied in the United States in 2023-24, to campuses like ours. The sound of other voices and other languages will always be celebrated in Pardee and at BU. Pardee graduates, the voices I hear on the sidewalk are yours. Even when I haven't any idea of what's being said, to me, the sound is beautiful. Not just because of the words, but because of what that sound symbolizes: pluralism, internationalism, and welcome. So wherever you hail from, your Pardee education has taught you not only how to navigate, but also how to appreciate these differences. You have the tools to hear not noise, but what historian Abigail Balbali called a vivid and cacophonous humanity. At Pardee, you've been taught by faculty, and don't anyone get mad at me if I leave any countries out, but you've taught by faculty from Belgium, Czech Republic, South Africa, the UK, from Canada to Chile, from Sweden to Australia, from Kansas to New York City, Pakistan and Zimbabwe, Montenegro and the United Kingdom, Tanzania and Ghana. You've learned alongside classmates from the US, from Colombia, from Kazakhstan, from Bulgaria, from Ghana, from France, China, India, and so many others. You've learned in English, but IR education, global knowledge is our lingua franca. In a seemingly cacophonous world, your ability to be drawn to and indeed enriched by conversations that are foreign to you, rather than repelled by them, was nurtured here. Your curiosity, your intrepidity, and your desire to improve the world, that's your Google Translate. Pardee grads, don't ever allow yourself to fear those voices in the classroom, on the street, or in your communities. Instead, let them continue to be a source of endless inquiry and curiosity, a window not only into the individual speaker, but into the entire culture behind them. Consider the conversations you will overhear yet don't understand as a gateway to further inquiry. Not necessarily an invitation, but something like that, and a challenge to yourself to learn more. As graduates of Pardee and of BU, immersed in global affairs, you are imbued with respect for pluralism, diversity, and the beautiful cacophony that defines our sidewalks and our world. And regardless of where you live, you will encounter it in the people with whom you interact, in the things you read, and in the conversations you overhear. And as you go out into the world, you will confront forces that insist that you yield to the simplistic and seductive allure of the monolingual, the monochromatic, and the decidedly non-cacophonous environment. Resist this temptation. Remember the crowded and supposedly cacophonous sidewalks of Com Ave. Continue to embrace the euphonious, melodious sounds of difference. And once in a while, pause to eavesdrop just for a moment.